Right, but Lamed Gimel on the days is all I'm asking you.
Yes.
Lamed Gimel on the days.
Okay. So what we had is Rab Acha bar Avia told over to Rab Chisda a chiddush that he learned from Rabbi Yochanan, and that is, if you have grapes that are tamei, I have a trick how you can extract the wine from them, and the wine will remain tar ad kedei kach. You can use them for nesachim on the mizbeach. How do you do it? You take grapes in batches that will be less than a kibetza. Kibetza is the minimum size of oichel that could transmit tumah to something else. So if I take grapes and the entire mass of grapes that I have is less than a kibetza, then this mass of grapes cannot transmit tumah to anything. When I squeeze the wine out of it, the wine that comes out of it will not become tameh because they came into contact with the grapes, because the grapes are less than a kibetza, so therefore they cannot transmit tumah. But this is all based on the theory that the wine or the grape juice didn't become tameh inside the grapes, together with the grapes. So this is only working based on Rabbi Yochanan's theory that mashkin is mifkat pekidi, meaning the mashkin are not part and parcel of the grape. They're a separate entity, and we look at them in the grape as if they're sitting inside a jar. And therefore, when the grape becomes tameh, they don't automatically become tameh as part of the grape. They're not a mashkin while they're in the grape, so they're only susceptible to tumah once they leave the grape. And once they leave the grape, by coming into contact with the grape, they would become tameh. But since the grapes at that point are less than a kibetza, there's no way for this juice to become tameh.
One thing that's interesting, I just thought of.
Speak
now,
up, so I can hear.
One thing that's interesting that I just thought of now is that you make a different bracha when you on grape juice or on orange juice. So it does show that it's a different barrier. It's actually a different unit.
I hear. The actual peri itself.
Right, the fact that the bracha is different.
That's a good point. So Zok to Gemara. So Reb Chisda said, Omer Reb Chisda, was hakst mit an Teure von der Rebbe? I don't know what you're talking about. Man sayach loch, ul Reb Yochanan Rabbach. Who's going to listen to what you're saying? And who's going to listen to what your Reb Yochanan is saying? It makes no sense at all. The tumah that the juice had already acquired while it was part of the grape, that doesn't just dissipate. That's still there. So your whole trick is not going to work. Alma, from Abchista's protest, you see Kosovari holds that mashkin mivla beli. You see that the mashkin is considered absorbed into the peri, part of the peri, and therefore when the grape became tameh, the grape juice automatically became tameh. So when they come out, it doesn't have to become tameh then, it's already tameh. Originally, when the grape became tameh, the mashkin as part of the grape became tameh, and when it comes out, it's still tameh. Is that good?
No, I didn't understand his protest. What did he protest?
He's saying, how could you say such a thing? It's not true. The grape juice will be tameh.
Because it was already tameh?
It was tameh inside the grape. Because he doesn't hold mifkid pocket. He holds mivla beli, meaning it was part of the grape. When the grape became tameh, it becomes tameh.
One thing that's also interesting is that Rabbi Yochanan always says about himself. The Gemara is always full of Rabbi Yochanan, who Rabbi, right? Rabbi Yochanan generally argues with his Rabbeim. So the fact that we're arguing with Rabbi Acha Breda Raviva and even his Rebbe, because his Rebbe was only saying from himself. His Rebbe wasn't saying from earlier Tanoim or.
Right here, Rabbi Yochanan's own halakha. That's correct. So Amar Lay, so Rabbi Acha bar Rav Avia, who held of what Rabbi Yochanan said, and who held that mashkin is mifkut pekidi, Amar Lay, he told Rabbi Chisda, va'at loy tisbara, the mashkin mifkut pekidi. You don't agree with me and Rabbi Yochanan that mashkin is mifkut pekidi? If you don't agree with us, how will you interpret? How will you understand the following Mishnah? But now we learned tamei mace, someone that was a tamei mace. So this person is an avatuma, and he wants to squeeze out grapes. If the amount of grapes that he squeezed out is exactly kapetza, this is a very familiar Mishnah. We learned it a moment ago, yesterday, as a raya that even a kapetza you could do. But if it's exactly kapetza, it will be tar. So let's think about how is that possible. If you hold like I hold, like a Bechan holds, that when I hold on to the grape, when the squeezer holds on to the grape, the squeezer itself is being matama the grape only, but he's not being matama the juice inside it. Mishum hachi tired. That's why when the squeezer squeeze out the grape, as long as he's careful not to come into contact with the mashkin will remain tar. And Rashi tells us, how could he possibly squeeze out the grape without coming into contact with the mashkin? So Rashi explains that he uses wooden kalim, shute kliates, which are not makabel tumah, to squeeze the grapes with, or as a receptacle to catch the grapes, to catch the juice, and therefore he doesn't come in direct contact with the grape juice when the grape juice comes out. Rather, it's only pshute kliates that he comes into contact with. So if you hold mifkat pekidi mishum hachi tahirin, because they didn't become tamei from the fact that I touched them, they didn't become tamei from the fact that I touched the grapes, and after the juice came out of the grapes, I made sure not to touch them as well. So you can have a eitzef that they should be tar. If you're going to hold that it's mivla beli, meaning that the grapes and the juice are one and the same, and therefore they'll become tamei as soon as the grapes become tamei, amai tahirin. How will you, Reb Chisda, interpret this Gemara? How will you interpret this Mishnah? I mean, that says that a tamei mace has a way to be able to squeeze grapes and not make the mashke that comes out of them tamei, if automatically they'll become tamei. Amar lei, Zok Reb Chisda, I have a very simple pshat in that Mishnah to explain why the wine doesn't become tamei. The wine doesn't become tamei because the grapes didn't become tamei. Why didn't the grapes become tamei? Because they were never huksher to be makabel tumah. They never came in contact with a liquid. Ba'novim shaloi huksheru. We're talking about grapes that never became huksher makabel tumah because they never came into contact with any type of mashka. Amos michsheri. When will they become huksher makabel tumah? L'chisachetlu. Once you squeeze the juice out of them, the juice that comes out of it will be machshir, the grapes that they're coming out of, to be makabel tumah. But since we're talking about grapes that to begin with were only a kabetza, kisachet lahu, the moment you squeeze them to extract any juice out of them, butzer lahu shiura. Now these grapes are less than a shear. Once they're less than a shear, they don't become huksher makabel tumah, and therefore they won't become tamei. So here, it's not a question of if the grapes were tamei, will the grapes be matama the mashkin? Will the grapes be matama the juice? The grapes could have never become tamei because the grapes were never huksher l'kabel tumah. And now Reb Chisda is coming back with a proof. I'm going to prove to you that I'm right, that it's mivla boli. Because hadatanya halamaze doima. We learned a couple of blot ago in the discussion between the Tanoim, who held that when you're mashlim truma, it's pound for pound, and it has nothing to do with its value. So even though it's usher, even though this truma is usher, the truma that the Yisrael ate was usher, you still have to pay it back. Versus the other Tana, like I think it was Rebbe Kiva, who said that if the truma that you ate has no value, then you don't have to pay back, because he held you pay back value of the truma, not the actual volume of the truma. So if you don't say that, what Rebbe Kiva said was in his arguments back and forth, what would you compare this truma of chametz to? Truma of chametz that has no value, it's also in Gansen. What would you compare it to? You'd compare it to the trumas tusim vanofim, the truma of either berries or grapes, shenitma that they became tamei. There's no fuel value in them. You can't burn the kain has zero value out of it, because it's not like you can burn them for fuel, because grape juice doesn't act as a very good fuel, and neither does blueberry juice or strawberry juice. It doesn't act as a good fuel. So therefore, these things she'ein loy ba loy heter achila v'loy heter asaka. So the comment made by the Tana was that these are things that there's no way to get any hana out of them if they're truma tamei.
You don't have Zaysim listed here?
I'm sorry?
You don't have Zaysim listed?
What do you mean?
Here says Zaysim, Tusim, Zaysim, Va'anovin.
Right. Oh, no, Zaysim are out. Right. That Zaysim are in brackets specifically for that reason. Yeah.
Zaysim must be.
Zaysim would be fuel, oil would be fuel. That's why it takes it out. Yeah, that's why it takes it out.
just when you thought you could steer it.
Okay, let's go back there. Let me see if I can get it to. I'm trying to get the anchor to link. I can't do this. Zok to Gemara. So Zok to Gemara. How could you say that? Zok to Pchista. Loy to what you're saying that you can extract mashkin out of these tame dike fruits without making the mashkin tame. According to your Rabbi Yochanan, haheter achila name ispe. According to the way you learn, you can actually get the juice out of the grapes. You can actually get the juice out of the berries without them being tame, and then the kohen could even eat them. The boy dorchlu pachus mikabetza. Based on your solution, why in the world does a Tana consider grapes and berries that are tame as things that you cannot even have a heter achila from? You actually can, the way you learned. Zok to Gemara, Amarava, that's not a kasha. That's not a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Avada, you are able to extract the juice from it, and it will be tar, just like Rabbi Yochanan said. So why isn't it allowed by Teruma? Gzeira Dilma, Asibhu de Takala. You could do it. And if it's chul and it works, by Teruma, we don't allow you to do it. You know why? Because if you allow the grapes that are tame to lay around until you could squeeze them, we're afraid that while you squeeze them, you're going to pop one into your mouth. So we can't allow you by Teruma Tameya to squeeze the juice out of them, even though technically that juice will be tahar and the kohen will be able to use it. But we're afraid during the squeezing process, someone might give a pop into his mouth a grape, and then he'll be over eating Teruma Tameya. So that's why Rabbi Kiva mentioned that there's no value to grapes or berries of Teruma that are Tameh, because he won't allow you to squeeze out the juice, even though technically you can extract that juice b'tayra. We're talking about chulin. Rabbi Yochanan was talking about a case where you had chulin that was tameh. You have a way of extracting the juice from it, and the juice will remain tahar. But we won't allow you to do that by truma because we're afraid that you'll eat it. Zok to Gemara, umi chashinu takala, and this is a very familiar sugya because we just had it a couple of lot ago. Are we concerned that when you leave truma around, that you're not allowed to eat for whatever reason, like it's tameh? We're afraid someone might come to eat it. But Tanya, we learned madlikin bepas. You're allowed to use truma tameya of bread, and you're allowed to use the bread as firewood. Uvishemen shel truma, and you're also allowed to use oil that's tameh of truma. You can save it, can't put it on your salad because it's tameh, but you're allowed to use it as fuel. Shouldn't mas. You're allowed to use pas that's tameh or shemen that's tameh. So you see clearly that you're not worried about the color, because if you were worried about the color, you can't keep around this pas or this oil that's tameh because you might drink from it. On Malay, so he answered to Abaye. Rabbi answered to Abaye. There's a very big difference. Pas zork l'bein eitzim. We're not telling you to keep the bread in the bread box where it will stay fresh and you might eat from it. We're saying throw it in the woodshed together with the wood, in the Holzkammer, Vafisanan, the Holzkammer. And then the bread becomes moas, and you for sure won't eat it. Then you're allowed to have it remain around until you get around to using it as fuel. Shemen truma as well. We learned Rami lei b'chlimos. You put it into a dirty keli, an ichi keli, it'll become smelly, so nobody will even consider drinking from it. And if you remember, the Gemara questioned, why can't you keep wine around for ziluf and also put it into a keli that's moist? And the Gemara answered, if you're using the wine to create a nice fragrance, you're definitely not going to store it in the klimos. And that's why this solution wouldn't work for wine. But for oil that you're using just to light fires with, you have no problem keeping it in a klimos. Zok Gemara, Gufa. Let's get down into the sugya now of chashinin latakal. Madligin bepasu v'shem shel trumashin etmas. Abaye Omer mishmei dechizkiya v'Rava Omar devei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Marisa Omer Rafuna. So everybody agrees it's coming from many different sources. Lo shonu elapas. This that we allow you to keep something around, and we're not choshesh latakala. That's only if it's bread. Avachiti, if it was wheat kernels, that was truma tameya. Loy, we wouldn't allow it because there shemayavi bahen l'detakala. Even if you store it with the wood, individual kernels could be wiped off, and you would be able to use them. Therefore, we're choshesh latakala. But bread will become mos when you throw it in with the wood pile, and therefore we're not worried you might eat it. Even wheat kernels, you'd be allowed to store. In fact, why aren't we choshesh? You'll wipe them off and you'll eat them. He doesn't just allow regular kernels. He's talking about kernels that are bishlikta umeista. You cook them and soften them and made them moist like a porridge. You pour porridge onto wood, that becomes moist, and you for sure won't be able to eat it. So in a way, they're not really arguing. He's just offering another solution to use chitim if it's moist. And I believe Toysha speaks out that avada, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to mess up truma. However, if it was like that already, then you're allowed to keep it. If it was not like that already, you would have to burn it. Hachanami. So Reb Ashi said that. Reb Ashi said that regarding a different shaila, will apply it to here as well. That where did Rabbi Yochanan say that you're allowed to keep chitin around even though the truma tameya? That's only if they're moist. Frankly, more where did Rav Ashi say this halacha? Zoktamar aha damar Rav Avin bar Ravacha Amar Bitzchak Abba of Amar Bitzchak. Rav Avin bar Ravacha said in the name of Bitzchak, and he said as follows: Abishol Gevel Shal Rabbi Haya. Abishol was the guy, you know, the guy in the matzah bakery who stands there with the stainless steel pot, and one guy throws the flour in, the other guy throws the water in, and he kneads it. So Abishol was that guy. He was the guy who used to knead the dough of Rebbe, not only for Pesach. He would be Rebbe was needy, so Abishol was the kneader. He used to knead the dough. What's that?
We all need dough in the big picture.
That's right.
That's
right. That's right. We donators. That's right. Very good. You hear the Chaim says in society there's a lot of dough kneaders and there's a lot of donators. So it works two ways. So Zok Gemara, what did they do? I guess the water that he used, the water they would use to bake the bread, they would warm up. So clearly they were trying to make chametz, not matzah with it. And what type of fuel do they use to heat up the water for the pot? Bechitin shel truma tmeya. They used to use the wheat of truma tmeya, meaning if they would buy regular firewood, go to 7-Eleven, see what it costs. It's very expensive, but truma tmeya is almost worthless. All it could be used for is as a fuel, and it's not even as convenient as firewood. So they would pick it up very cheap. So that's why they use this truma tmeya to heat as fuel, to heat the fire that warmed up the water that Abishol used to knead the dough. And Rashi tells us, as an aside, we're not concerned that the grain itself that's being burned might by mistake come into contact with the dough and will then be metama the dough. Because Rabbi used to eat even his chulin b'tahiris chakodesh, and he was makbid that his dough should not become tameh, which is interesting because Rabbi lived after the Churban Bayis, and he was still makbid to eat his chulin b'tahira. So there are those Rishonim who speak out that even after the Churban Bayis, they still had the paraduma. They must have still had some paraduma ashes remaining that they were able to use to be b'tahira.
Yes, isn't Eichlin, how's Eichlin Tama Eichlin? How Tama
Eichlin is Metama. Eichlin could be Metama Eichlin.
It could be.
Oh, you mean how's Eichlin directly Metama Eichlin?
Right.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like how right? How would Tama? What's
that's a very good horror. So Shirash Alpha Bisharebi Eichel Chulin B'Tahiraya Lechayish Dom Nago Hanu Chitin Tmeim Beisa. That's a good point. If it's Eichlin and Eichlin is not Matama Eichlin.
Right.
So that's a very good point. Maybe it was a couple of maybes. Maybe if there's moisture involved, if there's water involved, if there's moisture on the dough, maybe that would be the problem. But that's a very good horror. It's a very good horror. Okay, so let's see because based on what we learned in your Knis Kana Kahanim, an Eichel could be Matama Mashke. And mashke might be able to be matama an oichel, but an oichel is not able to be matama an oichel. That's a very good horror. So zok to Gemara, and of course the dough that Rabbi wanted was dough that had to be Torah. So Gemara, Amai, how could Rabbi have allowed Abishol to do that? Dilma asabu detakala. If you have kernels of wheat lying around that you're using to fuel your fire, what if someone pops it into his mouth? And that will be a problem. So there is where Rabashi said his halacha that it's b'shlikto me'ista. what type of wheat did they buy from the Kohanim? Truma Tameya, to use as fuel, they used wheat that was already mos. And since it was already mos, there was no concern that someone would eat it. Abaye bar Avin, Rab Chananya bar Avin, these two gentlemen, Tanu Trumos be Rabba, they learned the sugya of Trumas by the Beis Medrash Rabba in Rabba's yeshiva. So Paga Bahu Rava bar Masna. Rava bar Masna bumped into these two Talmidim of Rabba, and he knew that they learned Trumas. So he asked them, Amalu Mayam Risu Betrumas, Deveimar. Tell me some interesting Chadushim that you learned about Hilchos Trumas by the Heilige Rebbe Rabba. We'd love to hear some Chadushim. Amrulay, they told him like a brisker tells. My kashalach, you ask me a kasha. They say a famous story, the brisker went up to Shemayim, and vice versa, the Rebbe said, okay, say over Shtickle Torah. So the brisker answers, no, you say over Shtickle Torah, I'll slug it up. So could be that's what happened over here. They said, no, we won't tell you halacha. You tell us what's bothering you, and then we'll see if we have an answer. Amalu, so Rabbi Bar Masa said, this is my problem that I have in Trumas. Because it says in the Mishnah there, none. Shasile Trumas, you have plants, little plants of Truma. And Rashi tells us, and it'll be relevant soon, it was like lettuce or cabbage. Shenitmu, they became Tomei. So now you have a plant of Truma that's Tomei. Vishoslam, and you planted the lettuce back into the ground. So the halach is Taharu Milatame. They now become Tahar because you planted them back in the ground. So they shed their Tumah. But it says here, Taharun Milatame, they're Tahar from being Mitama, other things. Whether or not they themselves are Tahar, we're going to soon see. Vasurun Milecho, but they're still also to be eaten. And Rashi says, at this point, the Gemara thinks, so even though these plants that were once Tomei were planted into the ground, they can no longer be Metame, anything that comes into contact with them, but they themselves still retain the Isser of Tumah, meaning it's Truma Tameya, and the Kohen may not eat this. Frek the Gemara, if they are Tahar, if they cannot be Metame anything else, which means technically they're not Tomei anymore, Amai Asur Milechel. So why can't the Kohanim eat them? Amrulei, so they answered back, oh, now you're asking the Kash on Trumas, we'll tell you what our Rebbe said regarding this problem. Hachi Amar Rabba, this is what our Rebbe taught us. My Asurin, when the Mishnah says Vasurin Milechel, it doesn't mean it's also for a Kohen to eat. Avada, it's tahor now that it's planted, and Avada, a Kohen's allowed to eat this Truma tahora. But what it means Asurun is Asurin Lazara. Even though it was planted, it still retains its status of Truma, and therefore it's still Asur to be eaten by a Yisrael. Umay Kamash Malon, what is the Chiddush of this Mishnah? That Gidulei Truma, that when you take Truma and you plant it in the ground and it grows, that still retains its din Truma, it's a Derabanan, it still retains its din Truma, and therefore a Zor may not eat it. Frek the Gemara, I don't need this Mishnah to teach me that. So who was challenging? Rava Bar Masna was challenging these Talmidim, and he said, "I don't need a Mishnah. Your Rebbe Rabbah told you that that's what this Mishnah teaches you. That Gidilu Truma is Truma, and it's also Lazarim. Tanina, we actually have a Meferish Brayso that says that Gidule Truma, Truma. So why do I need this Mishnah to teach me that Gidule Truma is Truma? V'chitema Gidule Gedulin. That what our Mishnah is trying to tell us is Gidule Gedulin. Umay Kamash Malon Bedover Shein Zarikala Hanami Tanina. So let's stop for a second. Gedule Truma, Zok Rashi, is if I take a wheat kernel and I plant it in the ground, that wheat kernel ends up disintegrating and a new plant grows out of it. That is Gidule Truma. Gidule Gedulin is if I plant something that does not disintegrate. If I plant a head of lettuce, I'm not sure how exactly you plant it, but the head of lettuce doesn't disintegrate. The way it grows is more leaves grow on it, and the stem thickens up. But what you plant doesn't get eliminated. Rashi says if you plant onions, it would be the same thing. The bulb that you plant does not disintegrate, but it multiplies, and there's more bulbs around. So therefore, that's called gidule gidulin. So Zok to Gemara, v'chitema gidule gidulin. If you're going to tell me that what does the Mishnah mean? It means gidule gidulin, and it's saying that over there, even this the extra stuff that grew is usher. Umayka mashmalon, and the chiddush is v'dover she'ein zarei kala. If you plant truma, such as an onion or a lettuce, where the original item remains, and it just adds on additional things, if you're going to tell me that's the chiddush that's being shared here, that's also going to be usher, hanami tanina. We have a brisa that tells us that as well by tevel and kol shekain by truma, because the brisa says hatevel gidulav mutarin. Tevel, its giduli would be mutar, meaning if I have a wheat kernels that are tevel, and I didn't mafresh truma, I was not yet mafresh truma from them, and I took this wheat and I planted it in the ground, and new wheat grew, mutarin. Whatever grew out of this tevel is going to be mutar. It's regular chulin. Of course, it's going to be subject to its own trumas and maasros once it becomes harvested and prepared. But it loses its status of iser of tevel up until the point that it itself grows and has a gemar malacha. So hatevel gidul of mutarin b'dover shezari kala, avol b'dover she'ein zari kala. But if I have tevel of onions that I plant, and more onions grow out of it, but the original onion remains, afilu gidule gidulin asurin b'achila. By tevel, in a case where the original iser, the original tevel is there, it just multiplies. There, even by tevel, it's usher. So kosher came by truma. So I don't need a mishnah to tell me that gidule gidulim are usher, because even by tevel, gidule gidulim is usher. So I'm stuck now in understanding the mishnah quoted earlier. Tanan shesile trumais shenitnu v'shaslam taharin milatame v'asurin melechol. If it's talking about tuma, the Gemara says, why is it tame? If it's tahar milatame, why would it be usher for the kohen to eat? And if you want to say it's speaking about zorim and it's telling you a chiddush of gedule truma or gedule truma, we already know that from other sources as well. So we're stuck with understanding pshat in this mishnah and trumas, and that is what Rabbi was asking. That's what I'm sorry, not Rabbi. That's what the gentleman was asking these two talmidim. That's what Rava bar Masna. Rava bar Masna's difficulty with this mishnah is, if you want to learn that it's a child of Tumah, it doesn't make sense because it's not Tumah. And if you want to learn the child of Truma, we would already know that from other places. So we do not know Pshat in this brisa. So Zok to Gemara, Ishtiku. They were quiet. These two Talmidim were quiet. They said over a Pshat in a Mishnah from their Rebbe, and what was the name? Rava bar Masna slugged it right up. So now they're stuck. So Amalei, they told him, Midi Shmielach. So they asked him, okay, listen, we're stuck. We don't have Pshat. But maybe you, Rava bar Masna, maybe you heard a Pshat about this Mishnah. Amalu, he told them, Hachi Amar Rab Sheshes. This is what Rab Sheshes said, and this is how he explains the Mishnah. My Asurin l'kahanim. It's Asur to the Kahanim. But the problem is, it's not Tamei anymore, because it says Taharin Milatame. So if it's not Tamei anymore, why should it be Asur for the Kahanim to eat? So the Gemara Anu Chidish, Hoyel v'yifsilu behesach hadas. At first it became Tamei. Until they replanted it, it was Tamei. Once it's Tamei, the Kahanim aren't thinking about it anymore. They're not worrying about it anymore. And there's a psul hesach hadas, because it says, V'ini nesat lechem esh mishmeres trumoisai, ovid lo shimer. You're mechuyev to watch truma, and since you stopped watching it, it has its own psul of hesach hadas. So even though once you planted it, it's no longer tamei, planting it rectifies the problem of tumah. But planting it will not rectify the problem of hesach hadas. Zok Gemara, hanichelaman da Omar hesach hadas psula gufave shaper. Yeah, it makes sense if you hold that Hesach Hadas is in and of itself a psul, it makes sense what you're saying. Ela Laman the Omer Hesach Hadas psul tumahava. If the only reason why Hesach Hadas is possible is because Hesach Hadas makes it that now it's a Safek Tumah. If you have not been watching it, it's possible that it became Tameh, so it's only a Safek Tumah, Ma'ikal Meimer. Here Hesach Hadas wouldn't work because even if it for sure became Tameh, once you replanted it, it's no longer Tameh. So your pshat in the Mishnah wouldn't work. Your pshat in the Mishnah works beautifully that a kohen cannot eat this if Hesach Hadas is a psul unto itself. But according to the Shita who learns that Hesach Hadas is only a problem because it's Safek Tameh, here we don't have that problem because you've already planted it in the ground, and any tumah that could have come to it would have already been bottled. The Itmar, because there's actually a machlokes about it. Hesach Hadas, if you take your mind off the truma and you're no longer watching it to protect it from becoming tameh. Rabbi Yochanan Amar psul tamahava. It's not a psul, an independent psul. It's possible because it's possible now that it became tameh. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar psul aguvava. It's possible because of Hesach Hadas in and of itself. Rabbi Yochanan Amar psul tamahava. Rabbi Yochanan holds that it's a psul of tumah, and therefore Shem Yove Eliyahu v'Yiterena. If Eliyahu comes and tells us, I can tell you for a fact that this did not become tameh, shoymin loy, you accept it, and therefore this truma will become perfectly good truma. So basically, by clarifying that it didn't become tameh, it takes away the psul of Hesach Hadas, because Hesach Hadas is never really a psul, it's just a chash tuma. But if we can clarify that it did not become tameh, then you don't have a problem. The Hesach Hadas is in and of itself a psul, and therefore from Yov Eliyahu v'Yiterena, even if Eliyahu comes along and tells us that I know for a fact that this didn't become tameh, ain't shaymin loy, you still cannot eat this truma because it has a new psul now. It has the psul of Hesach Hadas. Rabbi Yochanan is going to bring a raya that it's only a psul of Safek Tumah. It's not a psul Meneobei, because the Gemara tells us Rabbi Shmuel benoi shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Berka Eimer. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Berka, told us Lul Kotan Hoya ben Kevesh lemizbech b'Maravi shel Kevesh. So you're going up to Kevesh. When you walk up the ramp, you're headed from south to north, and you're walking up from south to north. On your left side would be the southwestern corner, because when you're walking from south to north, to your left is west. So you're walking up the Mizbeach, you're walking from south to north, to your left is west. So at the bottom over there, so not on top of the Kevesh, imagine you were at the bottom of the Mizbeach, right at the point where the Kevesh meets the Mizbeach, you would be at the southwest corner of the Mizbeach.
At the top of the ramp.
Even at the bottom of the ramp, too.
Kevesh meets the Mizbeach at the top of the ramp.
That's right, but if you were not on the Kevesh, you were off to the side, on the base of the Mizbeach, if you were at the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, that's a significant space, because that's the space where they would shecht oifis. I believe they shecht chatas ha'oif was shechted over there. So they would shecht their chatas ha'oifs there. I believe it's chatas that's shechted there, and not oila. But let me see if Rashi tells us which one they shechted. I believe it's chatas ha'oif they shechted down there. So there was a little opening there, a little hole there, a little opening. Hoya ben kevesh lemizbeach b'ma'arav shel kevesh. What did they do there? What did they do with that hole? Shom hoyu zorkin. Oh, psul chatas ha'oif. It's before. That's where they threw the chatas ha'oifs, which they shechted there. That's where they threw them if they became possible, because I couldn't just burn them. So uver tzuruson, we had to wait till they became nicer before we can burn them. Now the problem that we have is if something has a bona fide psul, you don't have to wait till it becomes nicer to be able to burn it. You burn it right away. So here there must have been some type of psul that's not a bona fide psul, and therefore we can't burn it right away. So let's try to figure out by a process of elimination what might be the problem with this chatas ha'oif that you have to wait until it becomes nicer before you can burn it. If you learn that the psul Hesach Hadas is a psul tumah and it's only a suffix, mishum hachi boi iber tzura. That's why you needed to have a waiting area for these birds. You couldn't burn them right away because Shema Yove Eliyahu v'Yiterena. If you were Masiach Das from this bird, and because of that you don't know if it's tamei or not, you can't just burn it because it might be tahar. So therefore, you put it in this lul. You wait till the time expires, and then for sure it can be burnt. Eli Amrit Yuresh Lakish. Did you hold psul aguf lamali ibertzura? Why would I need now to let it become noisar if it's possible, if it has a real bona fide psul of hesach hadas, throw it right into the fire. No need to keep it until it becomes noisar. But now we learn zaklau. This is the rule. Anytime something has an internal psul, yisarf miyad, you could burn it right away. Bedamu bebailim. If the problem is not in the etzem carbon, the problem is maybe the dam spilled out, or the bailim became tummy. Let's say it was a carbon pesach, and the bailim became tummy, so they're not going to be able to eat this meat anymore. So it's not a real psul; it's an external psul that you're not allowed to burn right away. There to uber tzurosan the yoytzin lebesis treifa. But a psul b'guf you could burn right away. And according to Yerish Lakish, that hesach hadas is a psul haguf. Why is there a need to store these chatas ha'oifs in the lul? Put it straight into the basis treifa. Omer lei, so Rish Lakish answered Rabbi Yochanan, Hi Tana, this Tana, the Tana who holds that you're not allowed to burn it right away, Tana de Rabba Baravuah. He is the Tana de Rabba Baravuah, and he holds the Amar Afilu Pigol Ton Ibertzura. He holds that all psulim, even psula gufs, you're not allowed to burn right away. You have to wait until it's nicer. And that's why, even though I hold that hesach das is a psula guf, like any other psula guf, you would have to wait until it becomes nicer in order to be able to burn.
Yes. How do we know that the Yochanan ben Breka is talking about hesach hadas as the psul?
Who is Rabbi Yochanan ben Breka?
Isn't the one who said this? Who told us halacha about throwing the birds into the hole?
Oh, the little Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosh Rabbi Yochanan ben Breka.
Shmuel ben Breka.
Right. So what about him?
But I'm saying, what's the? How do we know he's talking about oifis that were psul because of hesach hadas?
It doesn't say what it is. It just says
right.
Well, because we're using a process of elimination. We're under the assumption that kol shepsuloi begufoi yisarf miyad. So if we're under that assumption, by process of elimination, what could possibly be the psul that requires ibertzura? It can't be pigel, it can't be noiser, because those you would burn right away.
So
it must be a suffix psul. What's a suffix psul? Hesach hadas.
Oh wow! I don't
the process of elimination. If you hold a bona fide psul, you burn it right away. Then what is the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law must only be for some type of suffix. Hesach hadas is the perfect psul that's based on the suffix.
There's no other psul that's a suffix.
There's no other psul that Rashi says over here.
Oh, Rashi says it. Okay.
Well, I'm not able to. I'm not such a bub cookie that I can tell you there's no. I can never answer a question. There's no other because I don't know. But Rashi tells us that this is the only option.
Just the other day, somebody called you the Or of the Trinity.
It doesn't mean it's true. Okay, so Zok to Gemara Viter. Zok to Gemara Viter. So now we have another kasha. Nitma oisha nifsal habasar. The basar either became the carbon became tame, or the basar became pasul, oisha yatsa chutz l'klayim, or the meat which was kodshim, which is limited to stay in the azara, it left azar. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer says, even though the meat became tame, the dam is still good. You make this rika. Rabbi Yeshua Aimer lo Yisrael, and we learned in Kodshim, and it says in the pasuk of Asisa Eilesecha habasar adam, and Rabbi Yeshua darshins ein basar ein dam, which means if you don't have basar that the dam is going to be matir, then you don't spritz at all. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't make that tzeir. As long as the dam is still good, you spritz the blood. And Rabbi Yeshua holds you don't spritz the blood. Rabbi Yeshua, but Rabbi Yeshua does agree. She'im zarak, if you spritz the blood unlawfully, hurtza, the tzitz is maratza. The tzitz is maratza. So let's go back to the Brisa. The Brisa listed off three cases: nitma, nifsal, or shayotza. So nitma, we know what psula was. It was tamei. Yotza, we know what psula was. It was yotza. But nifsal abosar, what type of psul was it? What exactly is this mysterious nifsal habasar that the Brisa is sharing this machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? So Zokta my nifsal. What type of psul is it? Lav hesach hadas. All it could be is hesach hadas. Why? Bitmir the kivin the tan and nitma. The Brisa already lists off the psul of nitma and it lists off the tumul of yotza. My psul ikasu. What other type of psul could the Brisa possibly be referring to? In nifsal ba'avodas dam, if the psul is something to do with the dam, if you're talking about that when he spritzed the dam, the kohen had a machshava pigel, loy kari nifsal basar. It wouldn't have been referred to as a nifsal habasar. Sharei af adam nifsal. In that case, even the dam is nifsal. Uvahal loy nemer Rabbi Eliezer Yisrael. There, even Rabbi Eliezer would not hold Yisrael. So this nifsal habasar has to be some psul that only applies to basar, and it can't be tummy, it can't be yaitse. So the only option by process of elimination is alav hadas. Now, what does the Brisa say? That if you did it b'shoigig, hurtza. What does hurtza mean? That tzitz is maratza. Soktumar. If you're going to tell me that the psul of hesach hadas is somehow related to tuma, meaning it's a suffix tuma, hainu de mishkrachas loy demar tzitz. That's logical to say that the tzitz is maratza, because we know that's exactly what the tzitz is maratza on. It's maratza on problems of tumah. If you're going to argue that this is that hesach hadas is a psul aguf, amai hurtza. Why should the tzitz rectify a problem of hesach hadas? The tzitz only rectifies problems related to tumah. Zok the Gemara, my nifsal has another option. You used the process of elimination, and you said it could only be hesach hadas. No, I have another option. My nifsal but tful yoim. It became possible because a tful yoim touched it. Frank the Gemara, how could you say that? It already gives us that option in the Brisa. That's one of the options. Nitma or nifsal basar. So how could you say nitma means tuma and nifsal basar also means tuma? Yes, I could do that. Trey gav nitame. There are two types of tuma. There's the tuma of a real tuma, and then there's a tuma of a tful yoim. Kisalak Ravin. Because nifsal means it itself is tamei, but it can't be metama something else. So a tful yoim will passel the meat, but the meat can't go be metama something else. Kisalak Ravin, when Ravin went up to Yisrael, Omer l'shmaitze kamed Reb Yirmiyah. He shared this teretz. What was Rabashi's big oinus? That how did this all start? This all started because Rabbi Bar Masna wanted to know pshat on the Mishnah. Why, if you plant these vegetables, if you plant this lettuce, why is it that the Kohen can't eat it? So Rabbi Ashi came up with his ingenious Torah that it's because of hesach hadas. So Ravin said this over in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah in Eretz Yisrael. And how did Rabbi Yirmiyah react? He said, "Baveloi tipchoi. You guys from Bavel are a bunch of tipshim. Mishum de yasvi ba'ar de chashucha. Since you sit in a dark land, Bavel is considered a dark land. Rashi's Bavel Amuka. Bavel was in the valley, so I guess it had a lot of shade. So since you sit in a dark land, I'm recent shemaita the machashche. You say tinkala. You say dark svaris. This is why a smart person is called bright, and someone who's dark land, and that's why you say bat svaris. So I don't like your pshat. Did you not hear Did you not hear this halacha of Reb Shimon ben Lakish, the name of Reb Yosy, that would solve our problems? And what did he say? You had water that you're going to use, let's say, on Sukkot for the Nesachim. So what do? You go outside. They had a Sukkot. They went to the well, and they shept this water before Shabbos. They didn't do it live. They prepared it before. And what happens if in these kalim the water became tummy? So the halacha is heshekon v'achach kedishin. Instead of going to the well and get new water, that is our plan. Take this bucket of water, dip it in to the river. There's water that went through the base of Mikdash. Dip it in there. It'll become. You'll make a shaka, which means the waters that you have that are tummy will touch the waters of the river, which are tahar, and then you'll be matar the water. So if it's shikon v'achach kedishin, if before you were makdish the water, you had already gathered, shept the water, you already drew the water in buckets, but you weren't makdish it yet. So if you first made a shaka in order to be matar the water, and only then will you makdish it, then taharin, then it will be tahar. But a kedishin v'achach shikon, if you were first makdish the water and then you tried to be matar them, tmeim, they'll be tamei. Rabbi Yirmiyah. Let's think about it. The Michti. Zriya ninu. Zriya means you're making the water tar. You're making it connect back to the ground. Mali hi shaken v'achach k'tishan. Mali k'tishan v'achach shika. What's the difference when you did it? Even if you take water that's kodesh, hashaka should help. Why not? Yet we have a gzeira here that if it was a k'tishan first, we will not allow to use it. Alma ain't real hektish. You see, there's a gzeira to say that even though you were matarit, it's not going to solve the problem l'gabe Kodshim. So hachanami ain't real truma. So too in our Mishnah, in our brisa that we were struggling with. If I plant this truma, it's not matam anything else. So why can't the kohen eat it itself? It has become tar for the same chumrah that ain't real hektish. Truma has a din of kodesh, and we will not allow it to become mutter after it once became tamei. So right now it's 7:52. So the question: if the other wants to daven at 8 o'clock in shul, we got to stop. If the other wants to daven at 8:30 in shul, we don't have to stop. You guys are coming to shul at 8?
Yeah, actually the 8:30 got moved to 8:15, I think.
So
No,
should
let's get back to 8:30, isn't it?
No, apparently they moved the minion downstairs so they can start at 8:15 and not wait for the
so if it is
thing.
8:15, so can we learn on and finish the Amid, and then you'll daven at 8:15?
Go ahead. I'm gonna daven at 8, but go ahead.
What do you mean 8? There isn't
There's an 8 o'clock meeting and an 8:15 meeting, but if the other wants to daven at 8, then we'll stop here. We're close enough, and we'll make it. Anyway, much of Shabbos we always have an extended session to catch up, so we'll catch up much of Shabbos. So we'll stop here. Have a wonderful day, Mechi. I'll call you by Leini. Would you like me to leave it on the whole davening, or that's enough?
That's fine. The lane is fine.
Okay, perfect.